Okay. So I think we're live, we're recording, it looks good. I'm just going to quit some stuff so it doesn't pop up. That's
I was just thinking the same.
A bit awkward. But cool, amazing. I'm very excited that we're doing this. Where to start? So this is our first ever live event for Once Club. You know that, you're here. And just for those who don't know, Once Club is a very new, extremely new social networking platform that is essentially built in mind for personal shoppers, powered by personal shoppers, with the idea to be able to create a wider network where we can essentially lean on each other, support one another in terms of, brand access, but also just, content, and have a really great place to really zero in, I suppose, on what we do and what makes, how to make our jobs better, but also to kind of give our clients an amazing experience at all times. And so I guess part of that means, doing events with yourself, who has essentially lived and walked and breathed personal shopping, especially in this kind of space of digitally. So we can really kind of give, the next generation of personal shoppers and stylists, kind of an insight into kind of where we've come from, where we are now, and I suppose, where we're going. So
yeah.
I would like to then kick off. Then maybe you want to tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, what you've done, and we'll sort of go through, your days with Net-a-Porter, which I'm dying to get into, even though I was there for some of it. And then I guess we will, and then let's talk about sort of what that looks like now, sort of post, well, not even post, during the pandemic and beyond, I guess.
Beyond, exactly. Yeah, so I mean, I joined Net-a-Porter in the early days. I think the business was less than 2 years old, and we were in the first office, and my desk was under the stairs. In terms of how I got there, I worked in retail since I was 15. And always wanted to work in fashion. And it was a case of figuring out what that meant for me to work in fashion. And I joined Harrods as a graduate after I'd done a history of art degree. And really, and I'd always had like weekend jobs in retail. And I joined the management training program with the sole aim of getting onto the ladies' fashion floor. And I wanted to be a buyer originally, but the reason I chose to work at Harrods was that they recruited their buyers from the shop floor. And I'd done a work experience like one summer in House of Fraser, and I never really understood how the ivory tower buying structure worked, because I was just like, well, how can you buy for a customer that you don't, that you're not interacting with, and you don't know? And that was how Harrods at the time worked. So that sort of was that. And actually, when I look back at so much that I've done throughout my career, it all came from the grounding that I learned in Harrods. And a lot of it came from the rigor, the standards, but also the people that I worked with there. And I was a young manager. My first placement was in Plus Collections, and I really learned from the ground up. I learned a huge amount about product alterations, but the really key thing that I learned about from working in Plus Collections was relationships, and relationships with clients, and managing a black book, and serving those clients, and what it meant. And those women were basically pulling pieces off the racks as the deliveries arrived and ringing their customers to tell them what would come in and what they put aside for them. And that was really, the grounding. So that was the grounding that that I came from. So anyway, I think I did 4 years at Harrods, and then I realized it wasn't really the right place for me for a number of reasons. And the opportunity came up at Net-a-Porter, and I really went there on a whim. It just felt right. And obviously then I stayed for 15 years. So there must have been something that was quite right about it.
What year was that? Do you mind me asking?
So I joined in 2002, and I was there until 2017. And when I look back, and since I've left, which is now nearly 3 years, which maybe it's longer. Is it 4 years? Can't remember. Anyway, it's flown by. But when I look back, what I've realized when people ask me why I was there for so long was that there was never actually anywhere that I wanted to work more. And there always just seemed to be there was always so much more we could do that we could be doing. And I think a lot of it was, there's always the lure of being, and it was always about trying to do something first, trying to create something new. And I think that was what attracted me to it in the first place. But I started in customer care, and I very quickly realized that we weren't dealing with the sales inquiries. And I'd come from a sales manager background, and I just was like, well, people want to buy. why are we not replying to these first? Yeah. And that sort of really was the conversation around that, and identifying sort of customers through either that I knew from my time in shop floor at Harrods. Like, I used to run the international designer room and some of the most prestigious sort of rooms on the floor. So knowing some of the customers, and then also recognizing the potential, because I've been used to like working with the Middle Eastern customer at certain times of the year on Harrods. And I just was like, wow, we can sell them all year round.
Yeah.
And, when you think this was in year 2000, around that time, when they were coming in and spending 10 grand in a single transaction between 6:30 and 6:30 of an evening, because we didn't even open late at that point, and so I sort of just saw all this potential, really, all this untapped potential, and that was what sort of opened the conversation around personal shopping, and then really the service that I created, and Lupe, who was my first hire, came on board sort of a year later to help me expand with, became around pre-selling. And we always were running waiting lists, and it was either for things that were sold out or for pieces that were expected. And there was an EIP list from the very beginning, from the first time I took it was called special orders. Right. The whole setup was manual. It was on Excel.
I love that, because it's still called special orders when you have something reserved for you. It's actually still called special. Like, I've had a special order. I'm like, and I'm always like, why is it called special orders? Didn't know.
Exactly. So always a special order in Stock Tracker.
Yeah,
that was the original, and we had to manually create each special order SKU and assign it to the customer. And so it probably doesn't work in that well. We know it's more automated now, but I can tell you how manual it was at the beginning. Anyway, essentially what happened was I realized that I was dealing with a really early adopter in the fashion cycle, because at the time it was all about style.com, which was a series of slideshows of all the runway shows. And so we had this customer who was going on to style.com, and she'd be emailing me saying, oh, are you getting the Marc Jacobs princess coat in size 2? So I'd be being contacted about people that had were first to the digital world, really, in terms of new into digital shopping, early adopters there, but also very early adopters in the cycle. And I basically that was how I built the relationships with these women, because actually at the time the stock that we had coming in was quite limited, and there were key pieces that women wanted, and it became this pre-selling waiting list culture really from the very beginning, and then it evolved into selling a lookbook, and it was really about just creating this constant thirst for newness with our customers. And it all came from fundamentally listening to what customers wanted really. And I think the other thing that I realized was that, because I had access to the whole buy before it arrived, and that wasn't something that you had on the shop floor. You didn't know what was coming in for the next season, but equally you didn't have a customer that was asking you for it either. So it just sort of opened the doors to this whole new way of serving a customer, that I was like, well, I've got a competitive advantage here. Yeah. And if they know that they can get it from me, from us, then they'll, and of course it created a repeat pattern, and we continue to amplify it in lots of different ways all the way over the years. So, I mean, yeah, so obviously we improve the systems bit by bit, but they're never as good as you want them to be. They won't even be now, I know that for sure. But I think it's amazing to look back and think where it started, and actually think about, well, actually the customer needs do change, and they and it's really important to be in tune in that, but actually that service is still built on the same premises around like that customer that wants first access to that that fashion product.
I always say the same thing, actually, no matter where I've moved to, or if I'm sort of dealing with a brand or with an omni-channel or what have you, is that it always comes, you know, I think sometimes there's an idea, and I was even listening to a podcast with Norma Kamali today, and she was saying exactly the same thing. You know, it always comes down to that relationship, the rapport. Like e-commerce isn't enough. You need to kind of always be able to, it's not like the answer, it's about the relationships and what you bring and what you take from that idea of, say, personality, and kind of transition it. And a lot of people come from shop floor and end up in the online space, and they kind of have to find that rhythm, because they might have had a great amount of customers, right, coming into them, having great footfall, building the relationship with the idea that that client has already come in with the mind to spend. And I think you just touched on it. You said women weren't actually always necessarily asking me because they didn't know that they could ask me that might be coming in. So, you know, did you find that was a bit of your transition, kind of getting those Harrods customers to actually kind of converse with you online or over the phone?
Yeah, it wasn't a huge overlap, I think, and it was more, I worked with the list of customers that had spent over £800, as I seem to remember it was back in the day. That was what got you into EIP, and it basically meant that we invited you to a private sale, and then the rest of it we sort of evolved. We evolved. But I think the big thing that I really noticed was, obviously, you know, and at the time actually we were building the relationship over email, and you had to be a lot more intuitive, and also it was much harder to find out who people were. You know, it's not like today where if you join the Net-a-Porter personal shopping team, you'd be provided essentially with a list of clients to work.
Yeah.
You know, and you can, chances are most of them have got a social profile, and you can figure out quite a lot about them and their lifestyle. So you had to work really hard at it. But I think ultimately I really realized that the key to all of it was listening and being in tune to their needs, so that you could anticipate what they were going to want before they knew it themselves. And I'm not sure what the silver bullet is to that, but I think it, you know, and it is fundamentally, it does rest a lot on good intuition. But, you know, I think it's equally, it's always about balancing the digital relationship with the in-person relationship. And even from the early days, like I used to meet clients that I'd known for a while when they would come from abroad to London, for example. We'd meet for tea or for drinks, and I always, as soon as all I needed to do was meet them once, and then I knew that I would it just took that intuition to the next level. And I think, you know, it was that basis. It took us a while to build out the client relations element of at Net-a-Porter, and get that balance right between, or try and at least get the balance right between digital selling and you know, the one-to-one in-person relationship building. But the desire was always there. The business just wasn't always ready for us. That was a common theme.
You know, when I first joined, we sort of joined kind of like an extension of the personal shopping team, which was that kind of style advisor department, which essentially was part styling advice and recommendations and suggestions, part sort of more product based, sold out questions and what have you. And we actually sat within the customer service, and at the time, you know, the Outnet and Mr. Porter, I don't even think was launched as yet.
No, I think you were yeah, it was just the Outnet, wasn't it?
Yeah, and so it was the Outnet, and we used to kind of really build a lot of information around, you know, what sold well, what wasn't, what we could use for clients, and there was a real formula to understanding how to anticipate and kind of getting used to that formation. But really, it was the first time where we realized like how the relationships were being formed with personal shopping. So it was, you know, and I remember there was girls who already had started there, and they had these fantastic, you know, you'd start to know each other's clients, because they would be known for coming into and being like, oh, she's talking to so-and-so, she's talking to Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. what have you. And there was relationships being built even at that level. And
exactly.
And you realize, okay, it is being online and there is a lot coming in, but actually the ones that are being sort of built into these great EIP accesses and things like that are the ones who, you know, and I remember there was girls who already had started there, and they had these fantastic, you know, they'd you'd start to know each other's clients, because they would be known for coming into and being like, oh, she's talking to so-and-so or Mrs. what have you. And there was relationships being built even at that level. And you realize, okay, it is being online and there is a lot coming in, but actually the ones that are being sort of built into these great EIP accesses and things like that are the ones who, you know, and I remember there was girls who already had started there, and they had these fantastic, you know, they'd are essentially the ones who end up really wanting to build into an EIP level, because they actually were curating these really great rapports. You know, you would think they were talking to their best friends.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Not actually. It was almost like being like the hairdresser. They knew it, you know, what's going on with the kids and where they're going on holiday and, you know, what their wife said. And I have a wonderful ex-client that he was, you know, sort of adopted him actually. I've got a really weird glare.
Looks like it's sunlight.
Yeah, finally. But I had this really wonderful client, and I remember when we because one of the shoppers was leaving, and she was like, I think you're a great match. And it was just the start of like almost a really great friendship. And he said, oh, Dominique, you know, I love that name because there's a program that me and my wife love, and it's I don't know if you'll know it, you're probably a bit young, but it's you know, Diane Carroll playing Dominique Devereaux from Dynasty. And I said to him, that's exactly who I'm named after. I mean, that was it. It was like a bond for life, because it's
hilarious.
His favorite show. And so
How have I never heard that story before?
Have you not? It was,
no.
It was like, oh, it's amazing. And it was just from that on, you know, and he would sort of call with a glass of wine and be like, have you got my wish list open? And it was amazing. And that was the relationship of how, and that's how he would shop. He wouldn't shop from, you know, he'd seen New Rovers, but he liked to, you know, recommend for his wife, have a glass of wine after work. You know, they were quite, you know, they run this big business. And that's how we started building relations on the phone. And it wasn't, and I realized, you know, I could have those relationships that I was doing at Topshop, right? Mm-hmm. But bring it to a phone element and to kind of have this chat.
Just using a different communication channel. Exactly. So, you know, I don't even know if you know this, but so the fashion advisor, that hybrid role started, it was originally called the product advisors. And I think we launched it like the end of 2004 when we'd gone through this like major boom. We had the Vogue article earlier that year, and we went through this, and we so it was Lupe and I, and we, it was still that whole thing of like customer care were not responding to the general product inquiries. Right. And that was what that role was for. But it was also a really powerful role because it helped us through tuning into the high volume of inquiries that are coming through, was how we persuaded the business to improve elements of UX on the site, like the measurements and the size and fit tab, and all of that came from the volume of, can you measure this item for me? And I was like, well,
we used to do that. We used to go
exactly, right?
Measure jeans or try on the clothes
for
the client and take a picture and then sort of send it, or be like, listen, I've just tried it on, I think you're going to be this size. And that was kind of like how we did it. It's so crazy. Even because I joined 2010, so like 6 years on, that was still
it was still going on. And it was, you know, it was helping for those clients that wanted some closure on that virtual boundary between actually seeing the product or being able to try it on. And that was a lot what that role was really about.
And I love the fact that there was really this kind of realization that just because we're online, it doesn't mean that we don't have that human offline element. And again, moving from company to company, I'm sure you have the same thing, is that there's this expectation, or people are quite surprised when you say, oh no, like we still want to do offline events. We still like to meet our clients in person. If we can, we'll visit them when they come to us, or if we can do something over there. And I've even worked at other companies where the whole purpose of a work trip is to just meet clients. And the clients are like, so why are you here? What event are you doing? And I'm like, I'm here to meet you. But the relationship after that visit is completely different.
It's a game changer. It's an absolute game changer.
You know who you are. You've seen a little bit of actually, you know, seeing someone. A lot of clients actually don't tell you or articulate what they need to articulate when they're online, because they feel like emails have to be short and quick, or they don't have time. So it's not until you're sort of either on the phone or you can see them that you can start anticipating the stuff that they're not saying to really service them better. I think, you know, and so kind of really mixing those offline, online elements in Net-a-Porter really showed me that this wasn't just about digital personal shopping. It was, like you said, the relationship you were building with your clients, or how you could sort of foster a relationship that felt like you were sort of seeing them almost often face to face.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was really what it was about, fostering that closeness. I mean, I remember I just used to have women that would just ring me up for a chat once a week.
Yeah.
I used to have this one client who used to buy all these international fashion magazines, and she'd ring me up and she'd be like, so I'm looking to create this look from this page, and she'd describe it all to me, and it would all be me down to me piecing it all together in my mind and understanding what she was looking for and trying to find it. And yeah, so it was always a mix of like sourcing, pre-selling, and then some people it was just about tuning into that. I can remember I used to look after Carol Vorderman in the years of the Galaxy dress. It was me that got her in the Galaxy dress, and then she must have bought every dress that Roland Mouret made.
Yeah.
So so that's quite a while ago. But yeah, but I remember that all came from conversation with her about, well, what kind of look are you, what trends are you attracted to this season? What is what look are you trying to create? And I can remember her being like, well, I want, like knee length pencil skirts with a sort of waspish waist. And I was like, I know the thing for you.
That's how I talk to clients as well. I'm always like, well, how do you want to feel? What do you want to look like? And I'm like, and I don't just say, I don't use kind of things like fashion terms. I'll be like, are you looking to be like, Kate Moss at Coachella, or do you want to be such and such? And that's how you create the look that they know. And so half of that
you help them visualize as well.
Exactly.
Because not everybody can visualize it, and feeling is underrated. Feelings are totally underrated.
100%. I mean, speaking of like the Galaxy dress, because you made me think of sort of when Victoria Beckham came, and that was a real moment in
the office in Whiteley's.
Like, the collection. It's
the collection.
When we first had like the dresses, and I think we had 6 in stock, and it was like, and everyone I remember before was like, it's not gonna, the press were quite derogatory, if you will, because
they were, weren't they? Everybody was like, oh, whatever.
We were begging for stock, but it makes me think of, for you, what were like some really key highlights of like, because there's so many in Net-a-Porter, even in 4 years that I was there.
Well, I mean, I will never forget the craze of the Paddington bag. Oh my God. I think we had 40 in the first drop, and literally, and also then we had EIPs buying them and putting them on eBay right away. I can remember that was the very beginnings of the reseller craze. But yeah, I mean, we did have this wave of like those kind of it products that I guess some of them were celebrity driven. The Paddington bag went on for quite a long time. The Muckluck boots. They were these kind of furry, I don't know whether you remember, sort of like furry boots. We just couldn't get enough of those. And then, the Michael Kors wedge with the turquoise up the front. Then there was the Louboutin. Well, Louboutin went on for a long time, right? Louboutin, say no more. I mean, the waiting list for like the Decoltissimo, and I can't remember the name of the shoe, but the shoe that went with the Galaxy dress, like that was just, that was such a massive one. And it was almost like, there were probably a couple of products each season that just had that almost like cult desirability about them. And that you'd almost get women like clambering over themselves.
We had I think my era was the Matalassi was
the Miu Miu bag.
Couldn't keep it in. The Lanvin Diati ring, color or what have you was crazy, but
because of course that was also an amazingly accessible like price point as well, wasn't it? Like £100 or something.
Staff could get it, everyone could get it. It was really, really popular. We couldn't keep it in. And then it was I think the Duchess of Cambridge wearing the Issa dress when it was like full meltdown. I believe the website crashed for a bit.
I should imagine so.
It's a blue wrap dress. It was insane. And that was like my first experience of really seeing like like you said, that cultish sellout products. And when we started to be like, it became a real thing about really sort of anticipating what we thought was going to be
the next one.
Because and sometimes we had to prepare for the person, for the EIPs. For those who are watching and don't know, it was an extremely important person who is essentially part of the personal shopping gang, if you were. And it was just that idea, because sometimes we would sort of, you know, these EIPs were missing it just because they weren't up at the right time. And so we had to start anticipating, like, we think this is going to be huge. The buyers would actually come to the team and say, tell us, you know, what should we be buying? And then all of a sudden you realize there was this really crazy, not so much that I think it was a shift, but I think it was a revelation that, like you said, people weren't sort of looking at the salespeople to inform the buyer. It was to come the other way around, and all of a sudden it was starting to shift that way.
And I think it's really interesting, because I guess, you know, from the buyer's perspective, they're the tastemaker when it comes to the product that's being sold. From, you know, they're representing the brand, and but actually, you know, from the customer's perspective, the personal shopper is really an important tastemaker. And whilst the customer starts with a relationship with the brand initially, the closer you get to your personal shopper, you know, that it's such a crucial element of the relationship. So so it's not always as straightforward a relationship as it should be, really, but necessarily between the commercial side of the business and the customer facing side of the business. In my mind, it's always been it's quite often the biggest missed opportunity.
Oh, I agree. And I think that was one of the things I was really grateful, I think, to work with you a little bit more closely, and especially I think when we were in a separate office to the rest of Net-a-Porter, we were with Mr. Porter, and you were sitting with us, and I remember you were sort of overhearing some of the conversations, and you really impressed upon us, whatever the customer, it's about the customer. And it was always that, it's about the customer. Just tell them it's, you know, whoever we needed to talk to get this, you know, you were like, it's about the customer. And it's something that really sticks with me through every single, you know, place I go. And I'm always just very aware to just say, by the way, if the customer doesn't come back, or we don't essentially kind of have that great idea of customer satisfaction from whatever department you're working in, the customer won't, you know, we lose it, and they don't tell us why. And that's the difference as well. You know, it's very easy to complain in person if you're not happy about something, if you're at a restaurant, if you're, you know, you don't always get that opportunity, I think. So it was always this kind of does this make sense for the customer? Are we sort of, you know, making sure that they come back, essentially?
Exactly. It's always about, it's not about the current transaction, it's about the next one.
Precisely.
And that's, I think, what gets lost in the sort of operational and commercial churn at times is, you know, the commercial team want the money in the till now, and you know, actually so do we generally, because we're trying to make our targets too. But we also, you know, I think that's where the smartest personal shoppers have got their game right, where they're always thinking about, I get this right, which means they come back, and you know, that wonderful wheel continues to, the wheel of retention continues to turn.
For sure. And I think if you have a certain idea of strategy, I think that was something that also kind of was impressed upon me there, that the idea that yes, you have the list, but what else? And or you have a relationship with, say, a certain amount of customers, but what else? And you know, it was starting to really learn that this was absolutely about selling and having a relationship, but it was being smart about it. And in your opinion, you know, how do you feel like you know, that's managed to keep evolving? But obviously we're seeing from lots of new e-commerce channels that have come up since Net-a-Porter, and they've started to adopt that type of, they've realized that personal shopping is quite key to, say, a luxury market, but not just luxury, obviously high street as well. How do you kind of think that you continue to evolve? Like, how have you found the process so far?
Well, I mean, I think easier said than done, but you've got to keep in tune with your customer, because their expectations are being set digitally by lots of other businesses out there, and it's understanding, you know, that wider context of maybe why they expect things of you in the way that, why they expect things to work in the way that they do. I mean, look, I've always taken the approach of service drive sales. And that was, you know, as you know, it was the ethos that we really instilled within the team. And that's why I was always saying it was about the customer. I think that and those changing expectations that are constantly going on around you, like, it's a real challenge to keep on top of it. And the service piece is difficult as well, which I guess feeds into why we think there's an opportunity to bring the wider personal shopping community together in order to share expertise and experience and I guess create a sense of togetherness, right?
Yeah.
The camaraderie that you get if you're sitting in a team, whilst we'll hope we will all be sitting in teams again, it's maybe not going to be quite the same as before, and so I think there's a real opportunity in that. And I think, also there's a lot of talk in the customer experience space around automation and bots and
subscription services as well.
Exactly. So subscription businesses that predict I don't know, Stitch Fix. So, where you're completing a questionnaire and they predict what you want and they're going to send you a box of pieces. And that probably appeals to a certain customer need. I don't personally get that because because it's too out of the box for me. But I think this is the thing. I think
silent.
Oh, sorry.
Oh no, you're back.
I think technology is an amazing enabler, and it's about embracing it in that way. And I think that's how we've seen businesses, new fashion businesses are coming in and pivoting technology in lots of different ways to create different experiences for clients. And I think they done in the right way and with the right ethics as well. They can be a really incredible positive influence. Where does the personal shopper sit within that? People like personal and human relationships ultimately.
Yeah.
And I whilst there will be lots of different business, smaller startups that will address different customer needs, ultimately there will still be a consumer that wants that one-to-one in the same way as they do with their hairdresser, their beautician, and other services in their life. I think so. Human relationships are so invaluable, and I think if anything, whilst this period has pushed everybody into the digital space a lot more, and there will be some new habits that we'll see come out of this, and people's habits will change. But I do think one of the things it has really highlighted is that need for the human connection and the human touch still. And retail will need to evolve. It needed to evolve anyway, but I just think it's really exciting. There's so much opportunity.
No, 100%. I think we've seen it's this whole tech revolution, I suppose, is what it is, sort of that from 2000 or what have you, has evolved really, really quickly.
Yeah.
Much quicker than sort of any other sort of, before the TV generation. Radio was around for a long time, and then TV, and it was very, it's been very quick. And we've gone from, I went from sort of starting my personal shopping career with barely using email because I was still very shop floor based, to then being email and phone, to then being working sort of right down to the end of social commerce, if you will, on working from WhatsApp, and people just going, I don't know how that works. And I'm then being in the bubble of that and going, I cannot believe the amount of money there is to be made by meeting someone on WhatsApp and working with them on luxury, and I even, from a point of view of seeing how fine jewelry has been such a strange kind of category, because I remember being at Net-a-Porter and people were very skeptical that we could sell real fine jewelry online. And then again, the personal shopping team did it because we had relationships with customers that were trusting our eye, trusting that we understood what they needed. We also understood that we could, if there was a way to kind of bring the customer with that piece offline, we should do it. And then kind of seeing that transition now onto things like WhatsApp. And like you said, the human connection hasn't changed, because whether I'm working by myself or sort of working with a team, one of the things I used to say was, if you can't talk to them because it's international, the time's wrong, send them a voice note. They instantly sort of disarm because they know that you're a real person. They can sort of
the real person thing is really crucial.
I mean,
really
yeah,
crucial.
I know girls who literally can sell off, you know, they're sending their clients 4-minute, you know, and vice versa. The women are telling them about their kids on voice note. They have a relationship. So then the next stage of terms of going, they think nothing about sort of saying, can you help me get this, etc., etc. And so, you know, finding this transition of what's happened really, really quickly means that also we're seeing, like you said, lots of new business models come out of it. But what I haven't actually seen change, like you said, is that kind of where the clients are really happy or where they have really good relationships, and they also feel like their needs are being met.
Exactly.
Wherever they are in the world. So
and it's ultimately about being, you know, about being where your client wants to talk to you.
Yeah.
So if WhatsApp is their medium of communication, then that works for them, and it's really being open to that as well. I know it is so interesting, the comments that have come through over the year, like, what, people really spend that amount of money online? I mean, I can remember meeting someone who had been in some original conversations with Natalie and Mark around about investing in Net-a-Porter, and at the very beginning, and being told this, how they'd had this conversation over dinner, like, well, people really going to buy clothes like that?
Yeah.
And you know,
no, and now most people, you know, and I've got 8-year-old grandmothers who are like, buy this for me online.
I know, right?
And they've gone from being completely mistrustful. It's a real, there's been such a huge shift, a huge change. We've got like a few minutes left, so I'd love to see if anyone who's listening or watching has any questions for us.
Definitely.
Please write in if you have any questions, send us a little question. But I wanted to ask you, what would kind of your advice be for someone who is either thinking of being in the industry or is currently in the industry and kind of looking to kind of, you know, up their game for next, you know, what do you think, you know, what would you sort of give them, what advice would you give them?
Don't lose, you know, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what it means to be a personal shopper. It's got an outward perception as being this really glamorous role.
Yeah.
It can be immensely satisfying when you've got these great relationships with clients, and, you know, and the money's coming in, you know, the figures are the sales figures are totting up in parallel. But I think, you know, it's really important to be aware that you need to approach it with patience, and you need to, and humility, really. And if you are, and be prepared to learn. It's still a grounds up industry.
Yeah.
You know, and actually, if you've got the opportunity to work with someone that's really experienced, take it, because that experience can be invaluable. I mean, you joined personal shopping as an assistant, right? To one of these, did you? Or did you join as a personal shopper? I can't remember.
No, it was an odd transition. I think what happened, we started off as style advisor, and then very shortly, I think you guys realized that
we restructured.
Restructure, and I think I actually hesitated at the first. Can you imagine? Because I was like, funny enough, because you mentioned buying, and I was like, maybe I could get into buying. I still had this idea about buying.
Yeah.
And, anyway, and then I ended up coming in, I think, it was like a personal shopping advisor. And what we did is we worked with top.
Yeah, that's right.
Like EIPs, they were top level, and our idea was to transition.
That's
and
right.
I think that's where I really found my niche, because I remember being given just reams and reams of lists, and
to work through, to fathom out who these women were.
Yeah, and I was calling them, and I was just like, "Hi, I just thought you'd want to talk," you know. And I've actually made a lot of great EIP, and I got to the point where I think Lupe and yourself and Roman just said, I don't know if we can keep giving these clients away, because we were building them to give over.
Oh yeah, that's right. It was a pipeline approach, wasn't it?
And
so I suppose, like, I think like top tips is probably, you know, if you get to work with somebody really experienced, snap it up and drink from their cup and understand their tricks of the trade, because you know, learn by observing, and be prepared to muck in. I mean, if you're in store, it's a physical job, right? There's a lot, you will remember that from your early days, you know, and
I'm steaming something at least.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And, you know, gathering, and then, you know, the logistics don't, I mean, look, logistics can be the bane of most of our lives in this process, but it's really important because it's at that point where you've closed the sale. Don't underestimate the importance of logistics, because the client's waiting to receive that piece that they really want. And it's, so that's, you know, yeah, so that final mile piece is really important.
I mean, everyone thinks it's super good. Everyone goes, oh, personal shopping, it's glamorous. And I'm like, yeah, I mean,
it can be.
When the days are good, they're amazing. You know, when you've got things like
can't beat it.
Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen from The Row doing a version of their presentation, or having Natalie Massenet, in Emilio Pucci behind the bar at Shaka Zulu. Like, these were amazing, glamorous things. But I was like, sometimes I'm just steaming in a room, and that feels a lot less glamorous. But I've got some questions, really good questions to ask you. Are you noticing an increase in interest or requests for sustainable or responsible brands from your clients? That's from Helen Rankin. Thank you, Helen.
Well, I guess I should also be clear that I don't actually work as a personal shopper anymore, but because my over the last, I guess, 10 years, really, I mean, I also spent a large part of my time at Net-a-Porter really honing customer service and turning it into a revenue channel. And you know, and I look at very much holistic customer experience these days. But so I can't actually accurately comment about direct requests for sustainable brands, but a key part of what I do is about being very tuned into to consumer needs. And I know that there's a lot of talk about that becoming an increasing priority, and I've definitely taken part in research. And I suppose my take on it is that I think, do people want specifically sustainable brands? They may be asking for that. They're likely to want to understand the sustainable element in pieces that they're buying. But my feeling is that everyone's got to move in that direction, because the consumer's expectation ultimately is that everything's going to be produced sustainably. So yeah, I suppose that's where I think it's going to.
Absolutely. And I think also, just to add on to that, is, like you said, everyone's just becoming a little bit more aware and a little bit more sensitive. And I really started to see the shift when we really started having a lot of conversations around fur. And I think we had a couple of moments when I was still at Net-a-Porter where, should we do it? Are we allowed to do it? Should we not do it? Does it matter? And there was definitely still, but we realized that ultimately there was an uncomfortableness with it. And actually, you know, if you could, and before, I think, you know, in maybe the early 90s, you know, faux fur and fun fur was a bit of a dirty word, but then you had like amazing designers, you know, like DVF, like Solomon McCartney, actually producing faux fur that they had never seen before. And so it actually didn't matter as much if, you know, and so we started to see that there was a real shift in behaviors that way. And like, even now,
there are whole brands around creating like sustainable faux fur now and all the rest of it.
So, and being really aware of that idea of like carbon footprint, and, you know, trying to make sure that they're working with certain factories or studios that really make sense, because also, you know, pricing also can factor into that. And so and it's being really sensitive about that. And I think that there has been a shift, but I think we've got a long way to go and for it to really make sense. But I think, I think there's definitely an awareness there from brands to omni-channels to customers, where it's changing and people are starting to become a lot more informed, because also there's a lot more information. We've got another question from Alice. What was your biggest learn with your time at Net-a-Porter?
Biggest learning? That's a good question. My biggest learning is that the challenges of staying customer first as a business are continuous.
Yeah.
And growth doesn't always have a positive effect on customer experience. And it can be really challenging internally to manage when you are constantly trying to meet the needs of a consumer that the business isn't necessarily empowering you to do.
Yeah. I think that's a fair point. I think growth can always be the idea of we want to grow, we want to do, but is it serving the customer the same? Or sometimes it's actually, you know, wanting to serve the customer in exactly the same way whilst trying to grow sometimes can hinder it, right? So it's a delicate.
Yeah, it's a really fine balance, and yeah, I'd definitely say that was a challenge over time and a learning, and being able to adapt to that and find the opportunity within it is what's really important as well.
Yeah, I think so. Just one last question before we go, from Rachel. What do you see for the future of luxury fashion industry, or who or what will be the next major disruptors?
I think it's going to be really interesting to see how, I mean, you know, Farfetch has just become such a huge element of the industry now. And you know, they're so powerful in so many ways because they're fueling innovation, and they're bringing together disparate, you know, smaller boutiques with a much more global consumer. It will just be, I think it will be so interesting to see how far that goes. And I think the direct to consumer piece is not to be underestimated. I mean, it's not for everyone, but I do think that there's a shift in brands wanting to own their own customer relationships. Yeah. And I think it will be interesting to see what, you know, to what extent that shift starts to happen.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, unfortunately, we're at the end of the time. I did joke before and say maybe we have to do a part 2, but maybe we have to do a part 2. There's so much to ask and to talk about with you. But thank you so much for joining us.
That's a pleasure.
And, you know,
it's been great to chat.
I know, it's funny.
We could carry on all evening.
All the time, I know. I'm like, talk. But anyone who sent a question and we haven't got round to it, we will definitely address those and send those answers back to you. And I hope you've enjoyed our Once Club first ever live event, and I hope to see you again for next week. And thank you so much for joining, and thank you, Helen.
That's a pleasure. Thanks, Dom.
Thanks
for joining us, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.